Gourmet Brewing. I'm your host, Doug Piper, and I want you to know how much I appreciate your allowing me to join you in growing our beverage skills together. I'm a certified Cicerone and a certified BJCP beer and mead judge, and I'm working on advanced ranks. These Facebook study groups and these webinars are my way of sharing what I'm learning on my beverage journey. During our most recent webinars, we've been with Sierra Nevada's Terrence Sullivan, Travis Rupp, of Avery Brewing, and his Ales of Antiquity series, Richard Priest on Kvike yeast. Groove, we did Better Coffee for Better Beer. That was a lot of fun, learning how to really do coffee right. Scott Ungerman of Anchor Brewing was teaching us all about their beers and the histories, and Laura Angotti on recreating ancient meads. Now, if you've missed any of these programs, the easiest thing to do is just click on the follow button in the upper right-hand corner of your screen, and I'll also share a link in the follow-up email after the main event. So today we're with Peter Symons. Peter's of Sydney, Australia, and it's bright and early there in the morning. He is the author of 3 brewing books. He's been brewing for over 20 years. He has a certificate in brewing from Ballarat University, Siebel Institute, and judges regularly in competitions when there are some. So, Peter, thank you so much for joining us a second time. On June 13th, you did a fascinating discussion with judging styles that maybe people might be unfamiliar with. I'm going to put a copy of that link for those that might be interested in it right over in the chat. Now, I tried that, and the first time it didn't work, so let's see if I can try it again. There we go. So, I forgot to put my keyboard down here. I better move it. Hi from France. I see Jane. Great, Jane. We're glad to join us, and we're glad everybody else is here. So, Peter, can you briefly summarize what we're going to hear about on fermenting controllers? Now, I have an Inkbird controller on a chest freezer. Does that count? Is that what kind of thing you're going to be talking about?
Well, good day. No, not exactly. That's your rudimentary fermentation control, perhaps heat control and cold control. I'm going to talk about something that you can build yourself, and you can use that to monitor your fermentation and use temperature profiles using Wi-Fi. So we're going to talk about BrewPiLess, and we're going to talk about iSpindels and how you can integrate those into BrewFather, which is my brewing software of choice nowadays. So apart from that, we might well be having a breakfast beer if you're in Australia, and for the rest of you, cheers.
Well, I'm looking forward to that part, especially because I think a beer webinar without a beer is just like a day without sunshine. So, but before we jump into all of that and crack open our beers, there are a few logistical items I'd like to go through before we move into the main presentation. First of all, if your webinar is not playing correctly, and the internet is really stressed at this time, so yours may not be, refreshing your browser window works almost every time. So if you can do that, actually, when we were prepping, I had to do that with Peter. So just refresh it. If you can't hear, double check your mute or your speakers. Down at the bottom, we've got some ask a question buttons. We also have a poll, which we would love to get you to check in on. It's really quick. And also in the chat screen, I see lots of folks over there on the chat screen typing in lots of good stuff. So we appreciate that. Keep the chat going. I just love that. So, and speaking of chat, we also have Facebook groups. We've got 4 different ones. I'm going to post those over here in the chat if you are interested. Maybe some of you are members, maybe some of you are not. We have the gourmet group, gourmet brewing group, which is really this group And then we got some very specific ones, the BJCP 101 and 201. These are for people interested in judging. The levels, I think, are obvious. And we also have a BJCP meat and cider. And I would just remind you that if you are interested in any of those, be sure to answer all the questions. I think there's 3 in every one of them. And because you will not be approved if I don't get the right answers to all 3. We're trying very hard not to have any trolls in the group. This series is part of a series of webinars that I'm helping with the BJCP and the AHA. So I would encourage you to jump into any of those books. Now, these webinars are provided through the generosity of our Patreon through the crowdfunding site Patreon. This is the economic model that supports the continuation of these webinars. They are 100% crowdfunded. So please consider joining our Patreon supporters so that future webinars can continue. I'm also going to put those over there. Let's see. There we go. And Gary says, no question showing up in the join buttons for cider for me. Yeah, cider is one that we've tried to, because I'm maybe not sure what questions to put in that one. I also want to thank Mark Sanchez for his recent financial support, in addition to the other regular Patreon supporters, Andy Glidden, Brent Dingus, Omer Bashai, Clay Blund, Dan Sakai, Gene Jockey, Jerry Pringle, Maureen Alonzo, Paul Clammer, and Brian Douts. And the BJCP has funded these sites. And I hope you'll also consider, if you're an AHA member, or if you're not one yet, it's one of the greatest deals going, and there are not many hobbies that have such a great advocate group working for us. Plus, you get discounts at all the homebrew places. So if you will join AHA or renew your membership through the link, there's a little bit of that money without costing you anything that I get as a to help fund these webinars. Everyone that is registered will get an email to the link, any slides, previous webinars, and links to the Facebook study groups. So, Peter, I'm going to try and get you back on screen successfully. It didn't work earlier, but how are you today? And how are things down in Sydney, Australia this morning, early this morning?
Well, it's not that early. It's just gone 8 o'clock. It's not too bad. I think we're pretty much in the same state as the rest of the world. Our governments, both federal and state, are requesting, with fines if you don't comply, that you stay at home unless you've got to go to the doctor or go out searching for food, which really has meant that brew club meetings have stopped. But they've morphed into something different. We've used Zoom a couple of times, and apart from the interaction of actually drinking the same beers as other people, we've carried on as normal, which is, not too bad considering. So yeah, it's tricky the world over, I think, at the moment.
Well, I agree, and I had some mixed emotions on even continuing the webinars or how soon I restarted them. But I quickly realized, at least for me, myself personally, while I really feel for those that are in difficult situations, maybe more difficult than mine, but there's others of us that really need a break from the bad news, because there's an awful lot of bad news. And I just think, what could be more fun than talking to a fellow beer lover in Sydney, Australia, as we kind of commiserate with their circumstances, but move forward positively as possible. So what do you think that we jump into fermentation controllers, or do you want to open up these our Guinness Foreign Extra Stout first?
I think we should do the beer. Okay,
I'm on that page.
All right, and I see there's a few people in the chat that have got some beers. Now, I've got a confession to make, in that my beer is not a foreign export stout, but it has some similarities and possibly some differences. It's one I brewed 2 weeks ago. So we can perhaps have a chat about what might be different and what might be similar.
Well, you keep going while I open mine.
So what I'm getting is sweet coffee, little bit of roast. As you can see, it's a brown head. It's lost its head retention because it's been sitting here for half an hour, and I've only managed to drink that much. But it's very much a breakfast beer. I mean, it's not as though you're allowed out, so there's no driving involved or anything like that. So yeah, that's a nice tight head. What's the ABV on that one, Doug?
I think it is 8.5.
Yeah.
Let's see. We'll zoom in on this guy. Not on that side. I really don't see it on this side. I don't have that answer. I think it is supposed to be 8.5. And actually, I do have my Cicerone card. So we'll look at that. According to Cicerone, it should be just over 6%. What Cicerone says, in terms of alcoholic strength, a foreign extra stout falls between an Irish stout and an imperial stout.
So John in the chat has said it's 7.5 based on the lower left of the label. What I have found with foreign export stout is it is different strengths in different countries. I've had it in Malaysia when you were allowed out a few years ago, and that was a much more alcoholic beer. So I think the FES does vary around the world.
I'll tell you, that's a rocky head. I believe I could put a dime on it. Right.
Well, that's good. I wouldn't advocate following that up. Anybody at home, I wouldn't do that. No, wouldn't do that.
Yeah. Well, especially right now. Well, right. So, Peter, cheers.
Good health.
Good health.
Or as my father always used to say, confusion to the enemy, which is COVID-19 at the moment. So cheers.
That's right.
So how dry do you think that one is?
It's fairly dry. I would say it's just kind of medium dry, but there's really no sweetness in it. But it's not just bone dry. I would say it's just better than bone dry.
And I think that's the difference between the beer that I have with a confession. My beer is a bit under attenuated because it was the second time I've used Quebec yeast, the Voss strain, and whilst it's fermented really clean at 35 degrees centigrade, whatever that is in Fahrenheit, it's I fermented it under pressure, and when I changed the pressure, I think I inadvertently dropped the yeast out. But this is, you have a classic foreign export. The other one in the range is the tropical stout, and I think what I've ended up with is a tropical stout because I've got this coffee and some residual sweetness, partially because I think the yeast dropped out, which has made it even better as a breakfast beer.
Not much coffee in my bottle. A bit chocolate. Maybe, well, it's got to have a hint of chocolate. I mean, of coffee, but it's more a little roast. But it's delicious. Very, very smooth. Enjoying it very much. I hope everybody else is The audience, any comments in the audience about your foreign extra stout and kind of what you're picking up from yours? And I see John says, look under the F, and I guess that is the, aha, sure enough. Just like he said, I overlooked it, and there it is. Ah, what happened to my focus?
Yeah, no, you've definitely, no, that says 11.2, yeah, 7.5, yeah.
7.5. All right. So thank you, John. We got that figured out. All right. And looks like I got all of it in this glass, which I'm pleased to have. So Peter, tell us about fermentation controllers and maybe how they would help us brew a nice beer like this.
Okay, well, if you can put that one up, Doug, that would be good.
How about that?
Yep, that's excellent. So what I'm going to go through is a new slant on fermentation control. Now, fermentation control, as we mentioned earlier, can be as simple as just heating and cooling in the fridge. Now, you should be getting a few bubbles there. Isn't that lovely? Right. So what you can see on here is that is the very top of my iSpindel. And this was inside my fermentation fridge in a metal enclosure that I just took the lid off. Now, that wasn't pressurized. That was just floating around in the Kreuzen. So I'm going to talk today about the BrewPiLess and the iSpindel. So to jump to what you can see and what you get out of these two items before I delve into the detail, what you've got here is that here's a beer that I fermented. The purple line is the gravity as being described by the iSpindel that's floating about in your beer. Now, the iSpindel basically works. It works on the angle of dangle. You may have heard of a tilt. Well, an iSpindel is similar to a tilt, except it uses Wi-Fi, and it's a lot cheaper. So there's a note in the chat, Doug, that they're not seeing my slides.
Oh, well, I'm seeing them here. So, Michael, might be unique on your end. Yeah, it looks like most everybody's getting it, and I'm seeing it here. So, refresh your screen. Actually, I just had to do that myself. So,
okay, it's good. That's right. We'll carry on then. So, this is actually a real log. This is the BrewPiLess screen. This is a legacy version. This is one I would have done probably 2017, something like that, when I first started playing around. So you can have your iSpindel details here. You put in your OG, your starting gravity, and it'll work out your ABV over time. You can see here that you can set where it says fridge set or beer set, this line here.
Peter, I'm not seeing your pointer. Can you describe where it is?
Oh, sorry. Can you see the pointer now? No.
No.
So the green squiggly line is the actual beer temperature as it was being sampled. And that beer temperature in the yellow line, that was what the iSpindel temperature was being recorded as. And as you can see, it's slightly different. So I attached my temperature probe to the outside of the fermenter, and the iSpindel, of course, is floating around in the top of the wort. So there is a temperature difference between the two. Is it significant? Well, perhaps a little bit, because being on the outside, you're not getting quite as a good a reading as the inside. But on the other hand, on the inside, it's in a tube that's got some electronics that, whilst they're not working all the time, are generating a bit of heat. So between the two, it's not too bad. Right. So that's what you get to see. And then we've got the question of, if you do spend all this time constructing a BrewPiLess and an iSpindel, does it actually make better beer? Well, one of the key things for me was that you can actually set up a temperature profile. So you can see on the left-hand side that it says 17C. You can configure this thing for F. I don't know why you'd want to, but you can. And then you put in the number of days, and that gives you, as that graph on the right shows, it gives you a fermentation profile. Now, you can also set this to trigger by various specific gravities. It's not something I felt the need to play with, but you can do. So it's very flexible in the way that you actually can control your temperature. Now, on the better beer question, you want to keep your yeast happy. So you're going to have happy yeast to start off with anyway. So on the basis you've got happy yeast, then the next thing, and you've oxygenated and you've done all the good things that you're supposed to do at the beginning, then the temperature control then becomes the most crucial thing. So what it did for me was I was using WLP 007, which is the dry English yeast, and I was finding, before I was using this sort of controller, I was having diacetyl problems because I wasn't managing the temperature profile enough to clean up the yeast, to clean up the byproducts of the yeast. So by being able to replicate the same fermentation profile time after time, then I was getting much better consistency. So that's one of the things that I think makes BrewPiLess better than, nothing wrong with an Inkbird, but I have no familiarity with what it can do. But here you've got a lot of ways that you can tune your fermentation.
Peter, just in case others don't know what an Inkbird is, why don't I show mine off?
Are you allowed?
All right, so
apparently yes.
All right, so this is the Inkbird, and they've got quite a few different versions. I've got at least 2 different versions, but it's just as simple. It basically is just like your house thermostat. You can set a temperature which a cooler turns on. In my case, I have a deep freeze, and I have a heater in the deep freeze. So you can just set either one of these numbers, but that's it. There's no Wi-Fi. There's no programmability. That's
right.
That's the end of the story.
Okay. All right. Well, so for a basic controller, that's probably fine. Less things to go wrong or whatever. But it really does. If you're at all handy with a soldering iron, there's really not too many different things. So what's up on the screen is a parts list. Now, I'll just hold this up. Wait, can you put me back on again, please?
Yep.
So when all's said and done, it's a perforated board with a USB cable that you use to power one of these. And one of these is something that you need to solder these pins on. And then what I made was about as simple as you possibly can. You connect your temperature probe in here. And I got a these are all everything I got there, apart from a few bits and pieces from the local electronic shop. I got a 2-meter DSB DS18B20 temperature probe, 2 meters, so it can get inside the fridge or freezer. And then a 2-way relay board. And these things are great. These things are called DuPont connectors. And I would suggest that you can buy a pack of these for a couple of dollars. Get these because it makes it really, really easy to connect everything up. So that's basically what that parts list is going on about.
So
and
Peter, could you hold the board up again? Just a quick question. So
okay.
Is that a board that was already pre-etched, or is that a breadboard that you had to run the wires with?
It's one of those.
Okay, it's a breadboard.
And then that's the amount of soldering that you need to do. It's not particularly complicated, but your best bet, if you've not soldered before, is to look at the various things on YouTube about how you solder, and it's really not too hard. And practice makes perfect. It's like, what else are you going to do while you're locked down?
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Right. So the heart of it is this ESP8266. Now this is a pretty cheap board, so $3 US when I looked it up the other day. I would suggest that with all these electronic parts, because they are so cheap, and the possibility of frying something while you're soldering it, particularly when you're not perhaps that familiar with soldering, get a spare or two. So it comes in a little packet, and you do want to get the version that's got all the connectors, because you'll need them, because ideally you'd make it so it's pluggable. So my original one was a 4 megabyte ESP unit. My more recent one, I got a 16 megabyte, and as you can see, Australian dollars gone down the proverbial recently, so that's about five US. And the great thing is here that you can put an external antenna on. So what that gives you is additional range. And if you're like me and I ferment in my fridge in the garage acts like a Faraday cage, and you can't get any Wi-Fi signal in there. So if you want to get improved performance from your BrewPiLess, then I would recommend getting the Wi-Fi aerial. It's only a few more dollars.
So Peter, is that the proverbial rubber ducky antenna? I mean, that kind of it's a little hard to tell from the scale. Aha.
So this end,
yeah,
just clips onto. There's a little small Duval there. You just clip it in there.
Yeah, microwave connector.
Yeah. So there is one trick though, in that these boards have a little. You won't be able to see it on here, but there's a little bridge that you have to unsolder and then link to the other one to get the external antenna to work, and that is fiddly. You will need poor eyesight and all the rest of it. I needed a big magnifying glass, and it is fiddly.
So Nicholas asked Peter, is the idea to connect the iSpindel directly to the fridge temperature controller unit so you can play with the temperature more easily? Is that?
can I get back to that in a minute when we move on to iSpindel, because it's sort of jumping a bit ahead. Okay.
Yep.
If I don't answer it, remind me.
Or put it in the questions, Nicholas, if you don't mind.
Yeah. So this is what I would recommend if you were buying it today. Get one of these, the 16 meg, and all the other connectors. Right. So this is how. So this is one for the record. This is how I connected it up. So there, all the things that I've waved about on the screen are in the picture on the right. And it's how I've connected them up and showing the relay control, etc. Now I've used, there's heaps of stuff on the internet. Okay, you could buy a PCB online. They come with different shields, and a shield is no more than a PCB that's ready to accept a lot of connections. There's heaps of good stuff. There's one called Thorac. I've chosen not to use it, and it's really this is about as simple as you can get. If you don't want to do any form of soldering, then what I'm showing on the right there, get one of these breadboards that you just, and get your DuPont connectors, and you're away. It's not very elegant, but does it work? Yes, it does. So that's the hardware side. And there's how I've actually connected it up. I must 240 volts in Australia, 110 probably in the US. Don't be playing with this at home if you have no idea what you're doing, because it could kill you. So use a licensed electrician. I happen to have a background in electrical engineering, electronic engineering. So I did it very carefully and checked it out thoroughly before I did it. But if you're at all unsure, don't wire it up. Get somebody to do it for you. The actual board and plugging it into the USB, that's not an issue. Connecting it to the power to switch the fridge on and off, or the heat belt on and off, that's something you need to be careful with. So rant over. Don't say I didn't warn you. Right, so here's, because it's a hobby and because I like brewing, I've been gradually working my way towards pressure fermentation. And here's on the left is FermZilla All-Rounder, which enables you to do pressure fermentation. And that had my Stout. My Stout was an 1881 Albury porter, and it's tasting very fine. So you can see that I've attached my probes. You have one for the fridge that sits inside the fridge, and one that's attached with blue tack to the side of the fermenter, and the heat belt is just at the bottom to give the background heat. This is one I'm experimenting with at the moment because I'm intending to use the same unit with a few modifications for pressure monitoring and control as well. So I've moved from using the relay board, which you can see bottom right, to using solid state relays. Why? Because I can. So that's where I'm currently at, and I'm moving forward on that basis. So now, if you built your hardware, you have to go to something called GitHub. Now, 3 years ago, I had absolutely no idea what GitHub was. I know enough now how to download things from GitHub and actually get the relevant information. And the site for the BrewPiLess software is run by Vito Tai. The current version is 4, and if you go there, you can see clone or download, and you can download the whole zip, and you get all the information and all the files. So if I just look at bins, the bin is where this is where you don't have to know anything about the actual software apart from selecting a bin file. Now, a bin file, from my uneducated viewpoint, because I'm an application engineer, not a software guy, is that you select a bin that suits what you want to do. So there's 2 broad different types here. You have a bin file that you're going to upload to your ESP8266. So you download a bin. Now the bin has got currently 2 different interfaces. You have an interface like I've shown on the slides, or there's a more modern interface that I've put up on the screen now, and you choose which one you want. You also need to choose a bin file. You can see they come in several different languages. The classic screen is labeled classic, and you have different configurations, etc. So the newest version is 4. I'm running on my prototype one 4, but I'm only running on my production one version 3.6 release 3, because I'm just naturally cautious that I don't want to stuff my fermentation up because of the some problem with a software upgrade. So with that caution, and if I can get back to my screen, hang on, mouse is not cooperating. Get over there. So here you've got, you download the software. There's lots of help files and lots of other things that you can do. And the next step then is to actually load the software onto the ESP. So to do that, you need a program, and the program's called Node, NODMUCU Flasher, which is what I used, and it takes a bit of a while because sometimes your computer doesn't have the drivers for it, and it will depend on the type of chip that you bought. What your ESP8266, some of the Pro versions seem to use this CP2104, and some of the older ones use the 341 SER. You just need to fiddle about until you've worked out which one works and which port. But the big thing is you need to get the green tick. You need a green tick, otherwise you're not going to go past go and collect your £200.
So Peter, what is a green tick?
You see in the bottom corner
Yeah.
of the black screen there, where it says no DMCU team. That green tick means that it's flashed to your chip.
Okay, we would call that a check mark.
Well,
Okay.
I call it a green tick. So, you know, each to his own.
Thank you for the clarification.
Not at all. I consider myself ticked off. Now, the potential of downloading the entire source, the BrewPiLess source is based on BrewPi, which has been modified by Vito Tai to work without the pi. And the entire source code is there, and you can fiddle about with it and compile it in different ways if you like. And if you're going to do that, you need something called VS Studio Code with the platform IO extension, if you like. I'm not going to go into that. It is doable, but it's way beyond my expertise and knowledge. I have fiddled, but I don't know how to do it. But you can do it, and if you're a software person, you should be fine.
But I think, Peter, what you're saying is we don't have to go there if we don't want to, that we can move along without having to go there.
Yeah, if you just download the bin file, upload it to the unit, and then we're just about to get into configuring the software to make it work. Yeah, you don't need to do all these things. I'm just putting them there that the potential to customize and whatever is there if you want to do it.
Okay.
If you're capable of doing it. So when you set this up, the big difference with the BrewPiLess over other units is that it's Wi-Fi based, so you do need to configure it to your network. So there's nothing, there's plenty of help files in the actual in the Git thing. So you press the reset button on the unit, and there's a little reset button. The little reset button on the edge of the unit. Where are we? There, that little God,
the white
square. Ah, there we go. Look, see that little thing there?
Yep.
That's the reset button. So you click that a few times, and that's enough to trigger it. And you look in your browser, and then you find something called config.htm, and then you put in your own details. You do want to make sure it's the same network that you use when we get to the iSpindel, so they're all talking together happily. So you do that. Then the next thing is that it doesn't actually know what you've got connected to it. So all of the devices, each of the sensors has its own address, and the way you need to configure this is that you, up at the top there, it's got initialize erase EEPROM. You do that. The very first thing you do is to do that. Then you go through and you allocate a slot to each one, and then you hit the apply button, and you can set chamber temperature, beer temperature, chamber heater, chamber cooler, and they're your basic ones. That's your 2 lots of temperature probes and your on and off controller for hot and cold. So that's about as simple a setup as you can get. Right, so you've got your iSpindel working now. You've got it all connected up, your BrewPiLess rather, and then we move on to iSpindel. So now I've made, yes, go on.
I was just going to say, why don't we look at our poll right quick so we can give everybody a little mental break. Henry says this is going pretty fast, and he's looking forward to the replay also. So in case anybody needs to refill their beer, we're going to look at the poll a second. So it looks like, Peter, about 66% are electronics enthusiasts. About 61% know what GitHub is. Almost split even on people using programmable temperature controllers for fermentation. So about 50-50. And we have about a lead of 46% monthly drink stouts. And right behind that is weekly. So I think we have a lot of stout folks that we have 0 votes for never. And so I think that the Foreign Extra Stout was a great choice.
Good, good. Now, I just want to deal with a couple of these questions in the chat while we're going past. So Nicholas asked, is the idea to connect the iSpindel directly to the fridge temperature controlling unit so you can play with the temperature easily? The iSpindel is a data capture device. It's going to capture the temperature incidentally of the unit inside the wort. It works by having a gyro board. It's then got a battery charging facility, which you can see on the picture to the right. That topmost, so the topmost picture on the left, that's the battery charger at the top. And what's underneath, which is the bottom picture on the left, is where it's got a gyro. Now that gyro is determining the angle of dangle, which is very similar principle to tilt, but tilt is a Bluetooth device, and iSpindel is a Wi-Fi device. So what you're getting from the Wi-Fi is an angle of dangle, an inclination, which you can then calibrate to be relatable to a change in density of the wort, either in Plato or specific gravity. And as the fermentation progresses, the angle of dangle changes, and against what is a fairly linear curve, it can project where you're at with your gravities. So the idea of having the iSpindel with the BrewPiLess is that can become an input into your temperature profile. I've not done it, but it's feasible to do it so that you could trigger, say you wanted to go to half gravity. At half gravity, you could put a trigger point in to change the temperature.
So Peter, a big advantage also going Wi-Fi versus Bluetooth. Won't it go much further in general?
I don't know. I've got no experience of how well a Bluetooth device inside a fridge, inside a fermenter, whether that be stainless steel or plastic, is going to behave. They obviously work because people have used a lot of tilts.
Yeah.
But then there is the ever-present question of costs, isn't there? Now, a tilt, from my quick research, is about 135 US. And as we're going to see shortly, I think an iSpindel would be less than $50. And I've built two of these now, and I've bought one. And I bought one because I wanted to be able to show you that that the development of the hardware has moved on. So I should point out that the iSpindel was developed in Germany. I went through many German and Dutch brew board type things to understand and use Google Translate to work out what they were saying. And the software is very stable now. It's quite efficient. It only transmits, well, you set it to only transmit every 900 seconds or so. So it basically stays in suspended animation until the 900 seconds, wakes itself up, sends a burst of information off. And that information is temperature, dangle, and battery voltage, essentially. So this one, there's no two ways about it. This is a much trickier proposition to put together than the BrewPiLess. And it does require you to take components off of these standard boards, which is tricky. So here's the parts list. Now this parts list, as I said, is probably less than 50 US. And this is based on 3D printing. Now, I'll tell you a little story about the 3D printing of my first one. So unless you've got a 3D printer and understand it, it's not intuitive how you can get one. So I went on the internet, as you do, and I ordered from one of the STL files that I found. I ordered 2 from some person in the center of Sydney. Sent him some money, PayPal, and then I went in one lunchtime to meet him furtively outside of a railway station, where he handed me over 2 3D printed sleds. Talk about suspicious. Anyway, the finding the right PET tube and the right sled or the 3D printed unit in there is tricky. Now, you can buy a kit from Germany, or if you're already in Germany, from 3D Mechatronics. I actually bought a kit from them when I was in experimental mode, and subsequently on-sold it. So that's about $90 US-ish, depending on what the exchange rates are. So you can buy all the bits. The other thing that you can get is, if you go online, can you zoom in on me again, please? There are boards that you can buy. I made the first ones with breadboards that I made, and then my subsequent one, somebody had already designed a nice unit, and you can buy them. Then you need a PET petling. Now, these are the bottles that these are the blanks that you make PET bottles out of. You might recognize them as being similar to the old White Labs yeast tubes. I've not found an application that will actually, or an implementation that actually fit in a smaller one. So you've got to get the right tube and the right sled. Now, the sled that I bought for the blue one, I had to do a bit of manual adjustment with my craft knife just to make sure the battery sat in nicely. So there are things to remove, diodes on the boards. There's, as I put on the picture there, there's a BAT 43 diode to go in place of a resistor. All of these things have come out over the years as a better implementation to keep the power consumption down, so you get longer time in the fermenter. I think the longest I've had a 1 battery charge work was something like 3 weeks, which is not too bad at all. Right. Oh yeah, the Mechatronics instructions are pretty good. So even if you're doing your own thing, their instructions are quite handy. So you've got a similar type of configuration. I've skipped loading the software onto the iSpindel. It's essentially download from here. So you go to GitHub again. And of course, for those of you who don't know GitHub, you do now. So here you can go through and you see where it says firmware download here. And the latest version, which is it's a very stable piece of software now, 620. You download that and you use the same process as you use for the BrewPiLess. Okay. Now, in terms of, there's a few points in the chat about I'm going too fast. Well, this is one of those things that this is an introductory to this. I'm giving you the key points of how you could go about it. You will need to do your own research to find the parts, to confirm things, and there are resources. There are a lot of resources on the web to do this. So I will now go back to the slide. So we've got our bin file, we've put it onto our iSpindel, we click the button a few times, we look for a new Wi-Fi network to come up. It says iSpindel, same sort of thing, 192.168.4.1, and then you get the configuration. Now, I'm going to do something I don't normally do because it's fraught with potential stuff-ups. But bear with me. I'm going to attempt.
You want me to turn off your camera?
I don't know about the camera. Are you still seeing me?
I do. I do.
All right. Right, now, here we go. This is, so up here, 192.168.4.
Oh, we're going to tune into yours?
Yep, there we go.
Oh, look at that.
So
Live
I've just,
from Australia.
yeah, live. I've just done the clicking on my, so I clicked the button, and now
Hold it up again, Peter. I'll zoom in on you.
Remember we talked about the button?
Yep. Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
So yeah, I clicked that a few times. I selected the Wi-Fi network.
Yep.
Then I typed in 192.168.4.1. And now I don't want to share my network info. So let's just see what that says. Oh, we'll do that one. So what that's saying is it's got the tilt, the temperature, the battery, and the gravity, which is implied from that. It's got 620. So I've loaded the firmware on here. And if you want to do a firmware update, you go to that screen that I showed you before, download the bin file, and then go in, and you can do it wirelessly. You don't necessarily have to do it with a cable, although it's probably recommended the first time you do it, use a cable and do it that way. So within these screens, the configuration will set it up to your network, maintenance, information, and whatever. So I'm not going to share what my network details are, obviously, but that gives you an idea of what you see when you do it. It's not that hard. Okay. So there was your interactive. So here's the sanitized version of what the configuration screen looks like. So you put in your own network, your own iSpindel name. If you've got more than one, make sure they're unique names. Update interval 900. That's important because when we get to talk about BrewFather, that interval is what BrewFather will accept. There's something called a battery conversion factor, which you can read up for yourself. You can set this up for a UBDOTS. I bet well, some people may know what UBDOTS. How about you, Doug? Heard of UBDOTS?
No, I will have to confess, just like the foreign extra stout that I couldn't find the alcohol percentage on, UBDOTS is a new one to me.
So the trick is with UBDOTS is that when you're setting it up, you probably want to set the interval to perhaps 15 seconds or something so that you're getting continuous updates, so you make sure it's all working. So if you go to UBDOTS, you can set up for a free educational account. This is important, otherwise it's going to cost you money. And then you can set it up, and then you reconfigure as we'll see in a minute, for BrewFather. Okay, so UV dots, good thing. Now there's some calibration because the system obviously needs to know what angle you started out at with, and water for its specific gravity is a good reference point.
Peter, let me interrupt for just one quick second. I realize it is the top of the hour, and we've got just about everything covered here. But I know some people have only maybe allocated an hour. It may be very late if you're watching in Europe. And so what I would encourage is this: if you can hang on, and Peter, can you hang on a little bit longer and answer the questions? Looks like we got about 12. Yeah,
look, that's absolutely not a problem. I've not got anything else to do today.
Nowhere to go.
Nowhere to go.
Okay. So those of you that can stay, Peter's going to stay and answer the questions for those that need to leave. I completely understand. What I would suggest is if you had a question or you want to vote one up, just go down there to the bottom of the screen, pop in your question, and your question will be answered whether you're watching live or not. And then if you need to leave, just know that we really thank you for spending this time with us. And we hope to catch you on the next webinar, which is going to be Brian Kinney from the Journeyman. And he's going to be talking about brewing in very small spaces. He brews in an RV. So it's really neat. I like small batch brewing. So that's going to be neat. Following that, we're going to have Lars Garsol. And Lars is going to be picking up on our Kvike discussion. So if you need to leave, we understand. If not, Peter, let's continue. We've got a big group here and I don't see many leaving. So we'll put you back on screen and get me off of it.
Right. Well, I should have rushed out to the garage and got some more stout. Never mind. I'll bravely continue. So we need to do a calibration. Now, the calibration process is quite well explained online. The only tricky bit is how you calibrate to get. I lost my thread now because we had the interruption. So you calibrate in water. You can then put it into BrewPiLess. You then configure it so it's working with BrewPiLess. And there's buttons to click for that, and it will actually calibrate it while you're brewing. But you do need a reference point, and you need to get your angle somewhere between 15 and 20 degrees, and you do that by putting it into plain water. And you might be able to see I've got a weight there, and that weight was attached with some blue tack to the sled, so that I got the right angle. That's where the UV dots is good, because you put it in and you can take it out, make an adjustment, put it back in again, and the UV dots is giving you, feedback on what you've just done. Yes, sir.
But blue tack, you have to translate.
Oh God, blue tack. You don't know what blue tack is?
No. What is? You can just answer the question. We don't want to look at your middle.
No. You get the bone. I thought I had some here. It's blue tack is a product. It looks like
putty. Yeah,
but it's sticky. So you roll it.
Yeah.
Warm it up, and then you can form it into the shape that you want. And that's what's holding that weight on.
Ah, okay. That's butyl rubber.
Whatever. It's called blue tack.
Okay.
I'm pleased this is an educational seminar. This is good.
Well, it looks like Gary says it's sticky tack. Jane said it's like putty. Brian says sticky tack. So I'm apparently the only one. Gary says, oh, Gary's saving me here. He says it's typically yellow in the U.S. So, yeah, I'd have known it if you'd said yellow tack. Thank you, Gary.
Well, it's more gray than blue. Anyway.
Yeah.
But this, I'm surprised you didn't pick that up earlier, because I mentioned BlueTack about attaching my temperature probe to the fermenter. Anyway, it's a Bostik product in Australia. Right, now we've got that out of the way. Right, so key point here is if you use the BPL calibrate function while it's fermenting, as long as you've got the initial angle in water, which is the 0 SG, 1000, then I just have one when I've got to my OG, and I know what the OG is, measured with a hydrometer, and I measured the final gravity with a hydrometer, and then I've got enough data points to get the slope, and the slope is linear, and you're good to go. So one lot of calibration in water, one brew should be good.
Did you have any trouble calibrating yours?
Well, apart from having to use the UV dots to actually get that initial angle right, because if you don't get that angle right, then you're not giving enough range, especially if you're doing a big beer, say 1080 or something. The angle becomes more and more crucial, because you've not got enough variation in the angle. And I just picked what the consensus was from all these various forums, and 15 to 20 seemed to be the go. So okay, that's what I tried. So yeah, so there's a bit more fiddling about to do, and then you do get the situation where it doesn't actually work. And I had several months of having difficulties, and ultimately you need to see the messages that are going backwards and forwards, and there's something called putty. And I'm not going to dive into that now, but I use putty as a program in Windows, and it actually will show the messages coming from the iSpindel via the Wi-Fi, that people who are better at it than me could understand what was going on. So it is important that you get if you're doing it yourself and you're doing your soldering, it is very sensitive to dry joints and poor soldering, so you do need to do a decent job, otherwise you won't get reliable operation. Now Nicholas has just said that mine is grey because the Office Works, which is the local mega stationery store, the commercial brand is blue. Well, I have to say I have never seen actually BlueTack. Anyway, so that as an aside. So I did have a play with Fermentrack. Now the whole point of having a BrewPiLess is not to have a Raspberry Pi, but if you've got one, then this Fermentrack software enables you to do quite a lot of things on how you would flash, and by flash I mean upload the bin file to the 8266. However, I found it was quite slow for me, and it apparently supports tilt, but I have no further information on it because I've never really got to use it, because it seemed too complicated for me when I'd already sorted out my BrewPiLess. So I put it up there in case anybody wants to delve into it. Same sort of thing, GitHub, da. Now, BrewFather. Now, this is going to show how old I am. I, for many years, used ProMash, and until the middle of last year, all my recipe development was done using ProMash. And I'd never felt the need to go to something like Beersmith. It seemed overly complicated to me. and I became aware of BrewFather, and BrewFather enabled me to translate all of my it's very extensive 20-year library almost of recipes via XML. And then I was able to tweak them. And my last book, Guile Brews, I validated all the recipes using BrewFather in the last quarter of last year. And I found it really good. And as you can see, you can integrate it with SmartPid, Tilt, Plato Airlock, iSpindel, and BrewPiLess. Now, this to me was good. So let me just pull up BrewFather. So what you can do in BrewFather is all of the iSpindel and the BrewPiLess works perfectly fine on your home network, on your home Wi-Fi network, but it's not accessible without a lot of fiddling about with firewalls and this and that to actually be able to monitor and control from outside of your home environment. Not that that's a big issue just now, because most of us are only in our home environments, but it was a factor. So within the BrewFather, hey, you've moved beers.
I did. This was getting long.
Oh, okay. I'll speed up. So what you can do here is, I'll go slow. Can you bring that one up full, please, Doug?
Yep.
So you can so this is pulling information that we've set up, or we'll do in a minute, set up from the iSpindel and from the BrewPiLess, and we'll report it into your actual batch that you're brewing. And I've not used iSpindel for this particular beer, but I fired it up last night, and as you can see, it's just done the ambient temperature overnight. And if I was using this in anger, it would give me the angle and the gravity change, but I haven't recalibrated the unit. I just wanted to show you that you can set it up so your iSpindel works here. Okay. Now, so I found this really, this was a bonus. Not only can you configure your recipes, you've got a range of things that you can do to monitor from afar. So what you do, you paste the information from BrewFather into BrewPiLess. So you go into, I'm not going to do it because it's got all my settings in there, and you're not having my BrewFather codes. Sorry, just not doing it. So what you do, you go into the settings of BrewFather, and you click the copy function, and you paste it into the URL. And the only tricky bit is to put in all these details here with that right inside the notations box, which is going to transmit all your information. There's also something called MQTT in BrewPiLess, which I think is a way you could remote control. However, that's totally beyond my knowledge, and how that actually works must be magic. I don't know. Others may. So it is very simple to link your BrewPiLess data for it to upload it to BrewFather, so that your fermentation log against your recipe is all in the one place in BrewFather, which I thought was rather neat. So here's one I prepared earlier. Thomas is also from Norway. This is a bit of a Norwegian theme today, really. Thomas Gangsoy is very active in development of it, and I've found it very good, and I'm only using a fraction of its capabilities. So you can integrate it. I've not actually integrated the iSpindel other than having that quick play, but you can do it. Now, there were a few lessons learned in all this. If you're fermenting in a steel cage, as I mentioned before, then the Wi-Fi doesn't tend to get out. And I spent years mucking around with trying to extend my my local area network into the garage, but eventually I'm now using a TP-Link Powerline range extender, and I put the detail up there. That's a much more elegant solution. That means that the whole of my garage is now irradiating everything that's in there very effectively. Using a fixed IP address is good for your BrewPiLess. Otherwise, every time your router gets reset, you'll end up having to find which IP address it's changed to. I would suggest using, unless you're a thrill seeker for actually brewing a beer, because that's what these things are for, not using the current version. I also made an error. There's the I²C unit for the display also comes in a 7-pin version, which isn't an I²C version, so watch out for that. A sled to match for the iSpindel 620 is a very stable piece of software. I mentioned about the difficulties of getting the sled design and the 3D printing. Now, could you just zoom in on me, please? So this is one that I bought, and comparing it to the one I had before, you can see it's smaller and it doesn't require any 3D printing. It's the same basic components, but it's on a PCB. Now that PCB is available and you could build that yourself. I actually bought this unit from a bloke that was on the local forum, and this one's got, hopefully you can just see there, it's got a version that's got the aerial but without the antenna bit on the end. This is to make sure I got good range from this unit. So that's a modern up to the minute implementation, and the support that group that I suggest that you apply to join is the iSpindel and BrewPiLess user group. It's got one of its members is the guy that maintains the software and has developed the software, Vito Tai, and also the guy on there that supplied me with the a fully completed version, 74 Australian last year, probably $50 US if you can find somebody that's done one. So that's a good spot to get some support. So I've still got a few to do things, because this is always as I showed you before, I'm working on my next version. Disconnects for the temperature probes. The one thing that it is very, very sensitive to is if those probes are not well connected, it will freeze. So you need to make good connections for your temperature probes. I have managed to do a compilation in VS Studio Code. Wonders. I'm going to upgrade to ESP32. I've got a couple of those to play with, and I'm going to add the pressure monitoring and spunding control. I've still got to do the brewfather BrewPiLess thing. need to sort that up. And there's where I'm working on next. So that's an ESP32, top left, with a selection switch and some relays. And on the right is a actuator, which I will use for spunding control, perhaps. We shall see. So that's an hour and a bit, well, quite a lot actually, of wandering around the world. So
on that previous slide, did that have a little digital display?
Yeah, that's the OLED display. That's what I'm saying. Make sure you get the I2C version and not the 7-pin version.
Okay.
So that's I could control, other than having the plugs and sockets for the power, that would control the fermentation just the way that is. It's not very elegant, but it will do the job.
Well, this was awesome. This was great. There's a lot of things, and I learned what blue tack was, even though it's not blue, apparently.
Well, I think it's gray, but then whatever.
All right. Well, Nicholas says the office version is gray, but the commercial is blue. I call it butyl rubber. So anyway, Peter.
Well, you do need to be able to form it.
Yes.
And
waterproof, I suspect.
Yeah.
So, Peter, I'm going to knock off your slides, and we'll go to the questions if you're good with that.
Yep. I realize time is getting on.
Yep. Okay. So we'll jump into the questions. Now, it looks like several people have voted them up already, but just as a reminder, if you need to run, you don't have a question, everybody gets one vote. So if you've got one and you skim it over and you say, I want that one pushed to the top, if you'll go and do that, we will do that. So, Peter, the first question, how have these devices helped you improve your brew day?
Not so much the brew day, but the fermentation, much better consistency. And there's the geek factor. It's something you built yourself. I've done an implementation of it. There are many other ways you could do it, and why not? It's because you can do it. Yeah, I used to have a fermentation controller like the Inkbird, just on and off, and I'd have to go out to the garage, and I'd have to manually set when I wanted to increase the temperature. And for me, the temperature profile capability of BrewPiLess, great.
Well, it sounds like it gives you more confidence in the repeatability of your brew.
Well, that, and because I've done so many recreation recipes, and some of them haven't turned out right, like the diacetyl with the 007 yeast. The second time I brewed that, I upped the temperature, changed the profile, and got a much better result. So it validated the way I was, the changes that I made. So yeah, it's a feedback. It's
yeah. More data is better.
Yeah.
All right. Our next question: could you compare the costs of building a BrewPiLess versus a commercial equivalent, assuming there's such a thing?
Well, I don't know that the Fermentrack is similar. There's the original BrewPi, of which this is a direct descendant. So if you have already got a Pi and you've got those other bits, then you perhaps only have to do the software thing and the interfacing. The essence of this build is the ESP8266 because they're cheap. So don't forget to buy more than one, just in case. So I'm not aware of anything for, let's say, $50 US, give or take, that would give you that level of functionality. I'm not including the labor cost of putting it together, the hobbyist thing, and because that's the fun. You don't want to actually make it too easy for people.
Well, I think I've got $30 in this guy alone. Now it's turnkey. I mean, you get it and you can plug it right in. So, but you want to change the temperature, you've got to go out there.
Yeah, and you know, I would hope that somebody will develop this MQ double T thing that will make it easier for ignoramuses like me to actually use it in BrewFather, and then you've got, wherever you are on the go, you can change it. But it's not an issue for me. I think it's as you can see, I've built many of them and I'm still playing about with it. The pressure control is going to be, it has the capability of pressure control, and with the Fermzillas, that's one of my current playthings. Yeah, so that's all good. So hopefully that answers that one.
All right, our next one comes from Dean. I have several tilts. They all seem to gather some krausen or sediment on them throughout the brew. Does the iSpindel have this issue also? If so, what's the best way to resolve such an issue in a safe manner?
Okay, this cropped up in many forums that I investigated. The advantage that I see, and I stand correction on this, is that it's going to get krausen on the top, as you saw with some of the pictures on the slides. It's inevitably bobbing about in the top, and it's going to get covered in gunk. If you use the calibrate using BrewPiLess, it will take into account the gunk factor. Now, I'm not particularly, shall we say, anal about the last decimal point on things, because I want an indication of what's happening. I've never really fussed about whether it's 1 or 2 points gravity difference either way. But what I do want to know is the overall trend of brewing. So my understanding is if you use the brew and calibrate function, it will take into account it's got gunk attached to it and might be weighing the or affecting the tilt calculation a bit, because you're actually doing it for real. That's my understanding. I've never taken it out to clean it. I've always left it in there.
So the short answer,
it's good.
It's good. Okay. All right. Thank you, Dean. Good question. Next one comes from Eric. What is your preferred method for calibrating the iSpindel, sugar water, or actual fermentation, also through the iSpindel software interface itself, or calibrating through BrewPiLess?
I think I probably answered that with the last question, in that apart from doing the initial calibration where you lay it to get the accelerometer or whatever it's called sorted out, doing it in just water and then in the brew has always been my way of doing it. I've never done the sugar water thing because that's just too much hassle, really. And I only use two or three data points. As I said, it's an indication of there's a lot of other stuff going on. Are you trying to put the proverbial on the proverbial? I don't think it's worth the effort. So I do the water angle, and then I use BrewPiLess to calibrate.
I think that's clear. All right, next question. Could you compare the cost of building an iSpindel to buying a tilt or a Plato?
No, Plato as in the bubbler.
Yes.
That's for me. There's another 8266 project called Brew Bubbles, which is a very similar thing. It counts bubbles in the bubbler, like the Plato bubbler. My issue with those, not that I've ever used them, is that I don't want to use a bubbler at all. I'm using closed fermentation, and that closed fermentation and effectively sponding has led to much better flavor. I feel much better flavor in my beer, and I can pull myself a pint straight off the fermenter. It's a well carbonated pint straight off the fermenter. So I wouldn't use for me, that sort of thing wouldn't work. But there is I think it's called Brew Bubbles. You might need to look that one up. And that's a do-it-yourself using the 8266. Now, I think a Plato is about, I did a quick look, I think about 110 US.
Yeah, actually, I think 130.
130, wow.
US.
Well, I'd look up the Brew Bubbles. I think it's Brew Bubbles. Look up, you'll find it. Like, Google's a wonderful thing. So for me, I wouldn't count bubbles. I'm not sure it's got any. Sorry.
It's okay.
Bubble counting's not for me.
Yeah, I'm on that same page. I've had too many poor seals. All right.
The second part of that, I think, was tilt and iSpindel. Tilt 135, something like that. Bluetooth. iSpindel less than 50. Build it yourself. Wi-Fi. Integration capabilities. There's integration capability with Tilt and BrewFather, of course. You're buying a complete product, so you've still got to calibrate it. Depends what you want to do. If you're happy enough to wield the soldering iron and do a bit, then go for it.
Yeah, especially if you're stuck at home.
especially.
Yeah. Okay, so Eric asks the question, BrewPiLess allows the iSpindel to be a beer sensor. In addition, the chamber temperature and beer temperature. Have you used this feature, or are you only using it for reading the specific gravity of the beer?
Yeah, there's been conflicting information that I've read online. I only use it for the gravity. I can see that it's monitoring because it's actually in the beer, but it's in the top of the beer. And you tend to think that the top might be warmer than down in the cone, perhaps, or whatever vessel you're using. So I don't use a thermal well because I've got the pressure vessel. I never use the thermal well in my old plastic fermenters either. So for a degree either way, given all the other variables you've got, that's a degree centigrade, by the way. Yeah, I'm not sure it makes much difference.
Okay.
Using the, if it dies, of course, the iSpindel, then that could be a problem.
So you get some redundancy doing it the way you're suggesting.
Well, you're getting another indication of what's going on, and from my use of the iSpindel and the BrewPiLess, there really isn't. There's a bit more responsiveness with the. It seems there's more responsiveness with the iSpindel. It's quicker to react, but is it really making a material difference to what you're trying to do at a particular phase of fermentation? I don't think so.
Okay. Thank you, Eric. All right, we will move to the next one. And Juan has this one. Can I connect a BrewPiLess to a temperature controller like an MT512 to modify the temperature of my chiller?
Okay. Short answer, wouldn't have a clue. But I do know that there are some facilities within BrewPiLess for using glycol. How that works, don't know. You'd have to research. Have a look in the GitHub thing and the README file. I've never used it, but I think there's something there.
So the answer is probably plausible, but requires more research, and you have not done it.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you, Juan. You stumped him. Gary asked the next one. How does the device compensate for a carbonation bubble cling impact on the tilt? And how does this aspect impact the readings?
Pass. Next question. No idea.
Well, shouldn't it be even, though? The bubble should be fairly evenly distributed if it's clean, right?
Well, it's not going to be clean, is it? It's sitting in a dirty, yeasty environment.
No, but in a beer glass, if a beer glass is not clean, the bubbles won't be even. If the glass is clean, the bubbles, and all I'm saying is it should have an even distribution, I would think, which would neutralize.
Yeah. Interesting question. As a practical brewer, don't know. Sorry.
It hadn't bothered you so far.
There's quite a few things that haven't bothered me so far, and unlikely to make much difference. So yeah.
All right. Good question, Gary. Jesus asks, what kind of information does my firm sheet must have? Firm sheet must have. Jesus, I'm having trouble understanding that unless Peter gets it. You might, if you're still online, you might type it in the chat and let me know. We may have to come back to that one, Jesus.
Yeah.
Yeah. James asked the next one. We use an Arduino to run 6 fermenters. Control goes through a small board with relays and then to a DIN contactor that turns on and off the pump for the glycol. We've had a lot of problems with the relays on the boards burning out. Any comments?
Yeah, not to the glycol question, but to the relay boards burning out. Yes, they're cheap, and yes, they die. I have gone through over 2 years, probably one every 6 months. I suspect they don't like the back EMF coming from the fridge turning on and off. I don't get it on the heat belt one. I do get it on the fridge one, and that's one of the reasons I'm thinking I'll use SSRs. My last fermentation, I used the solid state relays, and I was hopeful that they might be a bit more tolerant of whatever switching back EMF is coming. My suggestion would be try solid state relays instead, but buy spares. They're cheap, but or put decent sized relays in and some back EMF surge protection.
Yeah, that's probably about it. All right. Our next one comes from Jeff. Jeff says, for Aussies, where did you get the source of these boards? eBay, online, or can you get those at JCar?
Yeah, JCar is our local electronics think Tandy, that sort of place. Yeah, if you go to the iSpindel Facebook group, I bought mine from a guy that is the person there. He's up in Queensland, and he is forgotten his name. Brendan, I think. Brendan Goff. is where I got mine from, and I went for the super duper one with the extra antenna. So you could probably get them for cheaper. So I would tend to look on the Facebook group or in the forum, Australian Craft Brewing Forum. I'm sure somebody will, if you type in iSpindel in there, you'll find. And the same for people overseas. Your local forum will have somebody that's picked up the slack and has the requisite skills.
Well, and Jeff, it looks like Weenie has wrote in there, and that's not a disparaging name. That's what he wrote down. He said someone at a local,
yep.
You know, that is local. Someone at a local homebrew club will probably know someone. A guy in QLD builds iSpindels as a hobby cost, and it was about $60 Australian. A committee member knew him off Aussie Homebrewer.
Yeah, so he's also on Australian Craft Brewers, which is, in my view, a better forum. Anyway, now Jesus has put something in the chat now about his question that you queried earlier.
Yeah.
What do I have to measure during fermentation in addition to temperature, pH, and gravity? Taste test. I don't measure pH. I know commercial brewers do. pH is another factor that you could use during fermentation. No, I don't. Dissolved CO2. I mean, if somebody comes up with another cheap sensor that you could interface to the BrewPiLess, it's got analog to digital conversion facilities, which is how it does the pressure monitoring. So there's probably other people out there doing stuff, and if you're asking for it and you've got the capability, well, get on and do it. I'm sure it could be interfaced. It seems both the BrewFather and the BrewPiLess, the people that have developed the software are actively involved in maintaining it, which is always good to see.
All right, just a couple of more questions. Looks like 2. So if you've got any more, get it in right quick as we begin to wrap this up. So Gary asks, where am I casting from? So Gary, this is actually a green screen, if you hadn't guessed it already. And the reason is my studio, as I call it, just does not have a very good background, and you can look at some of my older programs to see it. So I'm trying to capture a theme with each program. So when I did the webinar with Sierra Nevada, I used their private taproom image that was there. And since Peter had selected Guinness, and I'm talking to Guinness about doing a webinar, this is their restaurant in Maryland, Baltimore, Maryland, I believe, or very close to Baltimore. So I thought that made a nice theme for it, and I'm going to try and do that in all the programs, especially now that I cannot travel to these locations. I think it just gives a better feel for kind of what's going on. So hopefully that's okay, and you don't feel offended that it's a green screen. All right, and Peter, this is our last question. Oh, got one more popped in. You'll like the last question, but Eric has got this question, and I think you've answered it already, but just we'll double check. Did you remove the LED from the gyro? I read mixed reviews of people leaving it on versus taking it off to save battery. And what's your iSpindel upload interval to the BrewPiLess BrewFather?
Okay, last bit first, 900 milliseconds. Yes, I removed the lead from the gyro because it is fiddly. But when I originally built this back in 2017-18, the general view was that you needed to take it off. And there is the potential of setting fire to your iSpindel. There is a risk if you don't take it off when you're charging. So I would tend to stick with the majority and take it off. Do not put it on. Don't leave it on.
All right. And then Jane asks the last question. I think Jane may have actually left. She had left a very nice compliment here. I'll see if I can find it right quick. There it is. Yes, another planet for me, but so much fascinating information. Can't wait to give it a go. Thank you, Peter and Doug. So Jane asked the question, Peter, that was great. Thank you. And I want to say that also. Thank you, Peter. What's your all-time favorite beer?
Tricky. The hard ones took last. I mean, the trite thing to say is the one you've got in your hand, but that's
trite.
That's very trite.
Peter, no pressure. I'll buy you a moment. Jane is online, and so she is listening.
Okay. I think a well-conditioned cask Timothy Taylor's Landlord would be my favorite beer. And because I have the full screen, I think my second favorite would be, again, a properly cask conditioned Hicks Special Draft from St Austell Brewery, preferably served in Cornwall in a small pub without too many people, and it's only a short walk to your bed. And then you can have several.
So what styles are those? The Timothy Taylor, what is that style?
That's best bitter, proper real ale. You should do one on real ale. Real ale is obviously it.
Well, who would be a subject matter expert?
Well, I have extensively researched the topic. So yeah, the Hicks Special Draft high-speed diesel in Cornish speak. Quick story. I grew up in Newquay in Cornwall, and when I was just above drinking age, shall we say, the St Austell Brewery launched Hicks Special Draft, and we used to go into the Vic bars at lunchtime. And the Vic bars was one of the most roughest places you could possibly go into. It's not a place you'd go into at night, for example. But lunchtime, it was nice and quiet. And they hid the Hicks Special Draft, the actual pump and all the clip and stuff. They hid it behind the lifeboat donations box. So you had to know what to ask for to be able to get it. And for the time, we're talking 70-something, 1970-something, it was a 5% beer when most were about 3%. So it set you up nicely for the afternoon, having a pint of that. And it's still lovely today. And it's in my book, Guile Brews, if you wanted to brew it. Available from Hulu, which I put a link in the chat for anybody that's interested.
Well, Gary's asking a question there in the chat, and it sounds like we need to ask it whether we dare or not. But I introduced you as from where you were from, but where are you from, Peter? Gary wants to know.
You mean as opposed to where I am now? Yeah, well,
apparently it's a Gordon Strong question, and I know you know Gordon.
I do know Gordon, yes. So I grew up in Cornwall, which is a different part of what's euphemistically called the United Kingdom. Cornwall is a very unique place. The indigenous people there are somewhat contrary, shall we say, and I'd like to think that I'm keeping up that tradition, and not at all like the rest of England. It's very important to understand it's a very unique place. I emigrated to Australia in 1978, so I'm a Cornish Australian. That's where I'm from, and I'm very proud of both places.
Well, I have not found you the least bit ornery yet.
Well, I did stop drinking a while ago.
Well, that's true. and I'm about done with the second one of mine. Eric says Adam Chatburn in Vancouver, BC would be an interesting person to talk about real ale. Do you know Adam?
No, I don't, but my son-in-law, because we're very international, my son-in-law is from Vancouver, and I've been to Vancouver on numerous occasions. And I went to there is a real ale tap house, I think, something like that. So yeah, the beer scene in Vancouver, British Columbia is great. Well, it was great when you could go out and
that's right. Well, I suspect at this point, Adam doesn't have a lot to do, so maybe we can get him on. I'll check him out. If anybody has any connections with him or any other subject matter experts you'd like to hear from, please, everybody has my email address. It's dougpipersr@gmail.com. So shoot it out to me. And Raphael asks, where do you see the industry going after this crazy time? Do you want to take a shot at that one?
It's an interesting question. I think like other economic, because this is an major economic event. And I think any business that was flaky before this event and was just getting by, and that's whether that's breweries or anybody, will disappear. It's just fact of life that if you were scrimping and saving and just keeping your head above water, this will take you out, no matter what your business is. On the upside, it's a I think most people around the world are quite resilient, and it'll come back again. Unfortunately, I don't think it'll kill off New England IPAs, but you can always live in hope.
Well, it's certainly going to be a testing, and I hope to share more with the webinars, and maybe we can find some of the best breweries out there. And again, for those that aren't offended, we'll do more green screen work so we can at least feel like we're virtually at some of these locations.
Yeah, well, this has been an interesting exercise, because all of your webinars to date have been very much focused on the beer, and this has been a bit like a bit of a difference. And I'd like just to thank you for giving me the opportunity. It's hopefully, from looking in the chat, and others may have sparked up a few ideas in a few other people, and that's great.
Well, I see a lot of compliments, Peter. It's always a pleasure to have you. Everyone seems to appreciate there in the chat the great work that you've done. And so I hope to get you on here again. And just to let you know, the webinars are continuing. And so our next one is Brian Denny. He is going to be covering minimalist brewing. This is small batches in small places. He's actually brews in an RV. So that one will be fun. That's going to be Thursday, April 9th at 6:30. And I have thoroughly enjoyed learning about Kvike. I think it's going to be a paradigm shift. Charlie Papazian inspired me to do it. When I was able to meet with him in November, Charlie said he thought that was going to be a game changer. And up until that point, I had really written it off as just another yeast strain. And after talking to Lars, I talked to him about 90 minutes preparing for his, which is going to be on April 15th. It is just fascinating. And I'll leave you with probably one of the comments. He said a whole bunch of things, but one of the ones I thought that was most poignant. He said when he was talking to one of the brewers up in the western edge of northern Norway, you know, there are no roads. You've got to fly into there. It's very isolated. And we were talking about fermentation times. And he said, Doug, I'll say what this brewer up in western corner of northern Norway told me. He said, well, he's not afraid to brew for 3 days. Ferment for 3 days. And what Lars was saying is the majority of them go 1 or 2 days. So, I mean, that's a paradigm shift for most of us. And the beer is delicious. I'm actually going to brew a batch. I might share the recipe. I mean, it's one Lars had given me, but I am going to brew it. It is actually a brew that is a non-boil. So I doubt it will be very clear, but Lars assures me it will be delicious. And I'm working hard to find the juniper. That's the only reason I haven't brewed it so far, is it calls for juniper, and I'm not sure what to put in it.
Can't you get juniper berries from the, where do you get juniper berries? From the spices?
I don't know. Maybe. I guess so. Do they use it in foods and stuff?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Well, maybe they're a food grade. Then I will find that. Nicholas says Asian or Indian stores. Okay. And looks like Raphael says he just coincidentally got your guide book today in the mail.
Excellent. So get in touch when you brew something and let me know how it turned out.
Yeah, Jane says she thinks it's juniper wood, not berries. These were juniper branches, according to Lars. And it actually, they use it as a bed also to filter the mash. So anyway, I've got to find some, but I'm going to do it for the upcoming April 15th program. So I promise I'll have a glass of that rather than this now empty glass. So anyway, we will wrap up. We're about at the top of the hour. Peter, is there any closing comment you'd like to make?
No, I really enjoyed it today. Hopefully, as I said earlier, a few people might be inspired to do something. And hopefully we can do another one. We do have a couple of other ideas up the sleeve, and we'll see how we go. So just remember, keep washing those hands and stay away from people.
That's right. Attend webinars. Well, thank you, everybody that joined us and spent so much time with us. It's a lot of fun. Those of you watching the replay, I hope you'll catch the next live one. Again, they're coming up, and this is it. I appreciate you coming, and have a great day. And just like Peter said, please be safe. Please wash your hands. Please keep your distance and enjoy webinars for the time being. Bye-bye.